Welcome in from your SUV, from your tractor or your ute, or maybe you're even riding your electric motorbike. But from wherever you are, you're with Alistair Moorhead and Glenn Judson, and this is the Al and Juddy Show. Well, what we want to do is reach out and provide you some technical information on a range of agricultural topics which may interest you, but to do it in a different way. Casual and comfortable format that allows you to listen where you want and when you want. This is intended for general information, and for more specific advice, contact your local Agricom rep. Well, g'day there, Alistair. Haven't seen you for a while. You're looking well. Have you been doing some like sunrise yoga or something? You've got a glow on.
Oh, thanks, Juddy. No, I haven't.
Well, what are we going to talk about today?
Juddy, it's a topic that's we've both got a long history in, which is forages for deer systems. But today we've got someone in to keep us real, and we have Stu Stokes, local deer farmer, in just to keep the whole discussion
real. Yeah. Won't get away with too much today.
Make up too much today.
So welcome, Stu.
Oh, nice to be here.
So tell us a little bit about your farming operation and the family history with deer.
We go back a long way. Dad started in the deer 50 odd years ago, and I got the bug. And so now I farm up in Springfield, a place called Russell's Flat, which is about 350 to 480 metres above sea level. And predominantly I did venison production earlier on, but in the last 10 years was sort of pushed harder and harder into the velvet side of things. So we run about 900 plus stags and about 700 breeding hinds.
So it's going to be a lovely, base to come back to when we talk about the different types of deer farming and the different systems, and then really focus in on the forages that might help drive those particular systems.
I'm just doing the maths in my head. About 50 years in the industry. How old is our industry in New Zealand?
About 50 years.
Yes, I was about to say it was amazing for some of the listeners from different parts of the world. The New Zealand deer industry has got an incredible history of pioneer farming system where we've had naturalised deer in our country for a long, long time. And the start of the industry saw a lot of I think people call it cowboy type activities out of helicopters, and it's well worth a read if anyone in the world wants to look at the New Zealand deer farming history. There's some beautiful stories and history associated with the way it started. But we are now talking about completely domesticated, as far as deer can be, farming systems and structured farming systems associated with deer farming in New Zealand, which is a really cool industry.
So I guess how do we sort of segue into this into deer systems?
Well, to
Alistair?
be fair, it's a really I think it's a pretty cool history actually, because we started university when Lincoln, the local agricultural university, was still a college in '89 and became a university in 1990. But in those early '90s, the university had a very, very active deer farm as part of its research base. And as an undergrad, you and I got to do some pretty significant projects, which, to be fair, gave a lot of up-close personal experience with these animals as just young students. So what just remind me what some of the projects we did?
I think what attracted me to this was I'd done sheep and cattle previously, and deer were a brand new species.
Oh yeah, from the species
perspective.
Yeah.
And so I think one of our first projects was looking at the liver stores of copper. And stags, and so we had to knock a few out, which was interesting.
Absolutely,
and then take liver biopsies of that. And now for an undergrad student, that's
you think about the health and safety of letting 5 students into a deer shed, dealing with stags, and that's 1990. So we are discussing a time when the temperament may be highly variable. It may not have been as good as the temperaments we have settled the industry into.
Remember there was that stag.
There was a terrible stag.
They're called Tyson.
Yeah.
I think it was named after Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
And he was just grumpy the whole time.
He might have bit his tongue off while he was on one of our watches, actually, to be fair.
Yeah, he was a grumpy guy.
Yeah.
and seemed to wake up pretty quickly.
I think the only reason he stayed at the research facility is that he literally had the best quality head of that particular group of animals, and therefore they weren't going to get rid of him.
Yeah. Anyway, so that was probably our forte into understanding these animals, and then a colleague did a project,
which we're all part of.
But I think it was an honest project. We were looking to try and break the seasonality of the reproductive cycle, and I remember sitting in a hay shed with infrared glasses, trying to work out if the stag was actually going to do a job.
Yeah, well, I remember being in the yards and just how, excuse me, but randy the hinds became. Yes. And you had hinds mounting you in the yards.
Yeah, well, we're trying to blood sample. It was strange times back then. So
and again, health and safety nightmare, to be quite honest, but a wonderful time to be an undergrad and just doing some of those projects. And then you segued into the start of pretty much a career that started around deer.
Yeah, so I started a PhD where we were looking at the differences between red deer, which are essentially derived from the Scottish red deer, which was one of the first importations, and what we colloquially know as hybrids, which are a cross between those red deer and some of the material out of North America. So we get this sort of red elk hybrid, and my study was trying to work out exactly why the hybrids grow faster than the red deer. And so there was a bit of there was a grazing study, and then there was we got some in metabolism crates there for a while, and looked at digestibility, and then finished off putting some through a CT scanner to look at the muscle to bone and fat ratios of live animals. So that was a very extensive study, and largely the difference between those is around mature body weight, around a lower proportion of fat being deposited in the carcass early on, and some changes in digestibility. Actually, deer are quite interesting in terms of the way they alter the digestibility of a feed through the seasons, and there's a small difference between those types. When you think about the red deer, probably evolving in Scotland, where there's the digestibility of that material is not particularly great compared to the North American elk, which are probably on the forest floor. So quite a different diet, but that's led to some differences in terms of those two different types of deer. So,
and from that project, before you'd actually finished your PhD, because we all know now that it took you ages to finish that PhD.
Thanks, Al. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, but you then shot off to South Canterbury in New Zealand to a deer master group.
Yeah, so that was a sort of an on-farm research group where I was tasked with gathering a whole lot of on-farm information and trying to make some sense out of that, some general comments around reproductive efficiency, around feeding animals, a lot around trace elements, because we had a number of vets involved in that, some animal health stuff. So trying to bring all that data together to make a sense. And I think we published a manual around some of the key findings from that bit of work. And one of those was actually around forages, because I guess when we were doing some work around forages, I reached back to my old mate who was still doing a bit of agronomy for one of the seed companies, and actually together we reformed and looked at a project where we were trying to drive lactation in hinds in a summer dry environment, and you provided some really good insights into what those feeding systems could be.
And I think that leads in really well, because really, as an animal type, it is a relatively easy animal to manage. It's got some really quirky natures, and what some of those quirky natures compared to other livestock, Stu, they typically based around and influence with day length.
Yeah, my calendar operates to day length, and they do the same. So I'm pretty much set in concrete when things should be done, because you just can't change them.
Yeah,
it's all driven by day length.
Yeah, so if you've got a season that's delayed by temperature, for example, means nothing in deer system, because they are focused on day length.
Yeah, that's very correct. Yes,
which means stuff for both ends of the lengthening and shortening of the day length, doesn't it? It's quite big influences on the shortening of the day length that triggers the mating phase.
Yes.
And the lengthening of the day length triggers the appetite.
Yeah, so when you're coming out of winter, it's really, and that day length happens, that switch happens quite early on it's late winter, early spring, and the problem is that you could be having a really cold winter with not a lot of feed, but the day length goes, start eating, boys, and it's a thing you can set your clock by, but it's not always easy to provide the feed at that time.
And with that in mind, just to tease out, because those two are obviously big drivers, but the winter itself is quite an interesting one because they have a really reduced appetite during winter.
Yes, so right? The opportunity to make them grow is set very much by day length and timing. You can't catch up. If you miss the window, they'll just shut down on you. So even their wintering programs, like wintering the stags and that, they almost go into a form of hibernation for the winter. So we get away with big breaks. We're sort of fortnight breaks because they'll just eat what they require for the day, unlike most other animals that'll gorge until they stop, until they blow apart.
Yeah, so just to quickly summarise that, we're discussing farm systems and forages for deer systems. We haven't actually touched on all the deer systems at all, but we've just discussed this general set of rules associated with the animal, which are heavily influenced by the day length and seasonal day length. And that's a lot of things get triggered in the autumn as it starts to decline. Appetite is one of those things, as starts to reduce and reduces through the winter months. So you can feed them, but they'll only ever eat so much. And then the cost of that program is quite a big deal in the discussion around the getting through winter.
And just highlighting that, it's a trap because the other classes of stock will actually respond really well to that.
Yeah.
And so I've seen a lot of situations where
lamb trading and beef trading, for example.
Beef animals, a great example. They will respond to good levels of winter feeding. Deer not so.
Yeah.
They're going, you can supply all you like. I'm not eating it.
And then quickly converting to the spring and the increasing day length, that they can literally within a week change appetite and potential for live weight gain accumulation.
It quite often catches you off guard. You think paddocks are going to last for ages, and then when that switch goes, which is sort of around the 10th of August, you'll see it kick in. Yeah. Suddenly their intake just blossoms and they'll grow to that speed. But
yeah, I think that's a really good to start the discussion about the different types of animals that fit in the deer industry. And that's over the top of all of them. But obviously the males and the females are treated differently. And obviously the weaners and the finishers have different periods of time in that.
So I wonder to start those discussions so we can get to our forages, which is probably where we want to end up. Let's see if we can just walk quickly through what a deer calendar looks like, knowing that there are some different systems where we can point that out as we go. But let's start at the phase of reproduction, for example.
So we start with the hind, which is the female red deer.
Yep. So that reproductive phase starts when, Stu? For you?
For me, it really starts in that middle of January, early February period. That's when I start focusing more on the hind than the fawn, even though the fawn's still on mum drinking milk, because her condition dictates how quick I can get her back in calf. Yeah.
So unlike sheep where you will have weaned and there's a period before mating, in a deer system, you are kind of right at the end of lactation when you're about to start that mating period.
Yeah, so there's two options. You can either pre-rut wean, which means we take the fawn off mum right before mating starts. So you've got to be on the ball then, because you don't want to be interfering with mum when she's actually should be mating and upsetting her. Or you can go through to post, which is you do it after weaning, which comes, both of them have their
where the stag is out with the hind.
Both of them have advantages and disadvantages. I pre-rut wean because of the farm I run. It suits it, and then I can concentrate on the hind as a sole mob, and I can look after her with her stag and everything, and I can look after the weaners as a particular mob and put them onto the best of feed and try and utilise that growth spurt we get in the autumn before they shut down for the winter.
So that's a really so when we're going to start thinking about forages, that's a really critical time where having high quality forages for both the weaners that are freshly weaned, but also for that hind, we've got a short window to get condition on her to take the stag.
Yeah. So just a background of this is that, relatively speaking, I would almost suggest not all, but the majority of our hinds would be in quite extensive deer fenced environments, often in quite rough country, not always easy to groom or create management because fawns hide. So it's really hard to do pasture management in a breeding paddock, and often you use the bigger scope of properties to fawn on because unless I'm greatly mistaken, cover is quite an essential part of maintaining fawn or young deer survival.
When they're born, it's an interesting one. So they tend to park the fawn, unlike any other animal. The fawn will probably be 5 days to a week old before you actually see it out running with mum. They just like in the nature programs where you see the hide of a fawn or a young one away, even to this day, the hinds will still do that. They look for some cover, they look to hide it, and they'll travel to it and feed it and then leave it and come away.
Yeah, and that's a risk profile if you don't have enough cover, isn't it? Because if they don't have enough cover, they'll start pushing them through into places of cover.
That's correct.
Where the fawn might not be able to get back from. Yeah. So, it's an interesting, very, very different style of animal. So the key point, though, is that what you do with your mating has quite an impact on your fawning date.
Yes.
So your genetics, but your hind body condition or direction of body condition.
Yeah, for me, weaning alone, taking that demand off mum is generally enough to set the hind up. If you wean early enough, the priority feed goes to the weaner because mum, even if the feed's not top quality, just sheerly by taking the fawn off her will actually will almost give her a flush and set her up for the stag.
So that whole mating cycle, though, is driven again by day length to a degree, genetics, but can be influenced by the change in body condition.
Yes, so the you can't, virtually impossible to bring calving forward, very easy to push it back. And that is if you put them under feed demand, especially young animals, if they don't sort of get that flush effect. Nature looks after itself, and she'll delay, and she'll put off getting in calf.
And that's a really interesting thing. You, by delaying that weaning, right? All you're doing is not allowing that flush when you do wean to come early enough to be of benefit
unless you use specific forages that you bring animals into.
Yes, and so I think that's the key. Is I think the secret, I think, Stu, to why it's working so well for you is your ability to wean, relatively early compared to a lot of the industry.
Yes, yes, it's similar.
And then because you've weaned early, then you can also put stag out early, which then
and I think the part that this is all meaningful for is that the growth rate on a young fawn is actually really large. And so for every day you're on the ground earlier, back when fawning occurs, which is when they're giving birth, I think typically it's in the middle to the end of spring in the New Zealand conditions. So just past peak production when most pasture's going off, the hinds are literally giving birth into cover, which is often pastures that are going off or in the landscape, and those calves and fawns are able to do about 450 a day at that point.
Correct, if you've got good feed. But so in my situation, and this is how critical day length is in feed, we can put our stags out in the middle of January without worrying about anything actually getting in calf, because until that day length is right, they won't conceive.
But you put them out.
But we can put them out in the middle of January and leave them with the hinds and fawns, and sort of builds the family environment for them. And we just wean with the stags in, and then we leave the hinds there, and we take away and we focus at that point. The weaning is the focus for the hind. As soon as she's weaned, she'll generally put the weight back on, and we've done the best we can for her, and then we focus more on the weaners and take them down.
So actually that takes us all the way through to fawning, which we've already partly discussed, is like every day you fawn a hind earlier, you pick up 450 grams a day a day. So, if you're 4 days earlier because she's in better condition and the stag is actually out early enough to catch her cycling, you've got nearly 2 kilograms on your weaning weight just by having 4 days earlier, which is quite big numbers actually, because it's very hard to do that with when they're off mum.
Yes.
Those sort of numbers.
Yeah, and then in that period, you've got a hind lactating, so we're needing to drive energy to keep her lactating, and it's really interesting. Some of the work that that we did when we were looking at these forages over that lactation period. You probably don't see the value of providing some of those high quality feeds in the growth rate of the fawn. It seems that mum buffers that really, really well. But what you can do, particularly in dry environments where the alternative is not so good, is actually keep weight on hinds while they're lactating, which means that they are in great nick to when we come to that weaning phase. So I think understanding that the growth rate of the fawns isn't really the
biggest thing that influenced.
Yes, it's actually the hind and how she comes out of it.
And in fact, if you take that to its conclusion of where we were discussing regarding the mating, there is more to be gained by fawning 4 to 5 days earlier than there is by what you feed it through lactation.
Yes.
After weaning, completely different story.
Yeah.
So
I guess when you look at all of those things, you go, so how, from a forage point of view, how do you actually drive or look after those different aspects? So I wonder, now that we've got our sort of our head around that. Oh, actually, the only other thing I did, only other part of this was around, and particularly for you, Stu, what drives your velvet growth? So now we're talking about males, and so what are the key times of the year?
Well, actually, it's not just about velvet, because then you're talking about the whole calendar again for those stags, because they react just as we've described. Instead of just having one out with the hinds, you have, 700?
Yeah, about 900.
900 running around being literally farmed. So what we might do is actually stick with that hind system and the breeding system, go through the forages that relate to that, and then come back to the stags, because I think
it'll get complicated otherwise.
Yeah, it gets really complicated, and some of these things overlap as well. And as we've already seen, but if you look at those hinds, I think that autumn pasture quality looks like it's quite an essential part once you start mating.
Yes, it's like any animal. The more you feed, the better the return. But certainly the hinds, if you wean early, they'll buffer you need quality feed, but it's not, they have an ability to recover.
So the reduction in energy requirement just from lactation is often enough that you can manage it through.
Yeah.
What sort of feed? So what do you put them on in the autumn? And you run a business that has fescues, Italian ryegrasses with red clover, broader acre pastures.
So the farm's actually split in two. So there's a block of about 140 hectares, and that pretty much runs my hinds on. We'll wean up there, and then the hinds will pretty much go back on to almost improved pasture. Yeah. Nothing overly special, but I am very critical. I use that February period when the fawn's on. If I'm not happy with the condition of the hind, we'll grain feed to try and keep that condition on. And I think often we don't pick it up in the fawn, but it gets me over that, not having to worry too much about the quality of feed for the hind going forward. But my focus really comes down to the fawns at that point.
So you transition really fast.
Yeah.
The girls go back out onto pretty much where they came from.
Pretty much. And I think you've got to realise by the time we get to February, I don't know what the percentage is, but I just know that the milk, if they're doing it a bit tight, the milk contribution, in a perfect world, the fawns should probably be eating 70 to 80% of its intake off the paddock. And if she's competing against mum, that's a huge
because they're very selective, so they can create their own quality of diet just by the way they browse, is it?
They're a browser.
They're a browser.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I guess from that,
from her, and then you try to get her through winter.
We're talking the hind?
The hind.
So we get through to about the 1st of May, and that's pretty much the stag should have done their job, and they'll be waiting at the gate because they'll be sick of all the women around. And then we'll do a circuit just around on grass, and then we get to June, and then they'll go on to Swedes.
Okay, so that's bulb crops for the hinds.
Yeah, Swedes or kale. And as I say, by then they've actually shut down for their winter intake.
Yep.
And we'll be looking at breaks of sort of 10 to 14 days. I feed a bit of baleage, but really the baleage is only there to gauge how they're going. They're very low input, and they're an amazing animal. They just pretty much shut down, and they'll eat what they need, and then they'll go and sit in the corner.
And I suppose that's the whole point of a wintering system for deer, is that it's actually, when it comes to the capital stock, it's more about the cost effectiveness of the feed system, because you don't really get a hell of a lot of benefit from trying too hard, other than having all the quality of feed on offer on a regular basis. You're not trying to create some sort of form of starvation. It's literally that it's just cost effective.
Yes, well, they're to me, they're a wee bit like a beef cow that's not going to calve until November. So once they're in calf, and if they're in good enough order to get through winter without any issues, you don't need to put any weight on them. They just shut down, and they'll sit quite happily, because the demand doesn't really kick in until we get through to calving. So
that's where, for example, our new Swede, the Massey Swede's going to be a really good example of a Swede for that system, where you've got a low dry matter, high yielding, good leaf content. Often your deer will take the leaf off over the first 3 or 4 days of that break, or they hold on a bit longer. You'll be amazed if you walk into the paddocks. They hoover into the bulbs a bit too. Yeah, so again, they're not overly worried about which they. Yeah, so they balance their diet, which is really cool too, because the majority of the diet is in the high carbohydrate, low protein version, which is the bulb. So the longer the leaf can stay there, the better the balance of the diet over time. But it's sort of lucky. It's early enough in the whole pregnancy and everything else. It's probably not, even if they do a bit short, it's not like they're right at the point of calving or anything. Which is much, much later. Yeah. You're well into spring by that time. So
and I think I guess that's why the wintering systems for deer don't have the same level of management that we get from dairy cows, for example, where you're right up hard against calving, and you've got to be 50 days and you're quite advanced in pregnancy. Yeah, whereas you've got browsers, so you've got it's really interesting. Cows will take the leaf off. That's the first thing they'll do. Whereas what we're hearing is deer have got quite a different grazing strategy around that. Again, kale, something like a soft gold. What sort of how do they attack a crop that could be 5 foot high? Obviously, they're a tall animal, but how do they graze? Are they browse from the top down, or? Well, it's really funny. We had a crop of kale 2 years ago, and it would be over 6 foot tall. Yeah. And they really grazed into it like it was being electric fence, because they don't like going into the crop. It's sort of they've been a hunted animal for years. So they don't like hiding in the crop. They tend to graze at the face and work their way in. And they'll graze it down reasonably low, and then as those stalks and as you later on you'll come back, and as those stalks soften, they'll go back and eat them as well. Yeah. So they're quite different. They don't like being confined. No, the risk of going into a crop and being discovered by a wolf or something like that keeps them out. So they just graze on the face and work their way in. And I'm interested, I think you made some comments earlier around these bigger breaks and the benefit of those when you come to renovate in the spring. What are you seeing there? The last couple of years, we've sort of gone from, I'd say, 5 and 6 day breaks to 10, and this year we'll probably go out to 14. What we're discovering is in the spring, first of all, we've done very little paddock damage, so we direct drill everything to start with. The big breaks mean we get very little mud and very little ruts or anything like that. So the last 2 years, we've just gone in with a rotocrumbler in August when they're getting to the end of, or when they've finished some paddocks. We've had great success with just running in with a rotocrumbler, whip over it once, let it dry out a bit, and then whip over it again. And then we're drilling an Italian. Yeah. And I don't know whether you want to hear the story about that. We'll touch on that later as we build other feed systems. Anyway, we drill the Italian in,
and that's in early August, and it's sort of technically too cold. But we're not worried about we'll still get our strike. We'll also get a strike of weeds, but we can spray the weeds out of that later on, and then we'll broadcast clovers into it, and that's been really successful for us.
That really touches on a few other topics there as well.
Yeah, but I think really nice to hear that this ability to reduce kind of the immediate stocking rate, that trampling pressure, and that we do see benefits in terms
and so
of,
that's with the hinds where we're just trying to get through low demand.
Yep.
Their primary nutritional needs are actually in the middle of spring because they're calving at the end of spring. So it's actually quite tidy system from a hind perspective. There's not many forage-based scenarios that you require during the start of fawning because you put them in areas that are more expansive and they're in a much more selective phase at that stage. They've got scope. They've got the end of spring flush.
For that calving period or lead up to it, really scope is king. Yeah. And to have grasses that probably don't run out to seed too quick because you lose the ability to control it. Yeah. So for those who aren't aware, when we're calving, we set stock. So that means we just put a set number, usually about 7 to the hectare, and we'll do that about the middle of October, and they'll stay in that paddock because they'll calve over a period of about 3 months or two months. And we can't really go back into the paddock or do anything with them. They just do their natural thing. They hide them and everything else. So we just leave them alone. So you just got to there's not a lot of pasture management at that time of year.
No, that's right. So you got to rely on what you've actually got and how you've already prepped it before you can do anything. And that comes back to a few forages. I mean, tall fescue is really interesting in that time frame because tall fescue does its primary seeding in particularly our earlier types like Haven. It's starting to throw its first seed head in the first week of October. So by the middle of October to the end of October, you're able to get through and probably literally pre-top that, and fescue throws very little seed head later in spring, which means it's probably an early enough species to actually do a pre-management and still have a little bit of a fuzz just so that they've got some cover, but without a big decline in pasture quality. Outside that, most of our grasses, ryegrasses, sit directly over the primary fawning window, apart from maybe something like our newer line, which is a plus 39 days, which means that those fawns, the majority should be standing and not still hiding. By, I think, about the 10th to the 15th of December, this grass won't throw a seed head. Okay. So if you stretch it out that far, you're probably getting to the end of the time that the fawns are hiding.
Yes, you would be.
And so then you might work around that. You start to move them between paddocks and clean up.
So two strategies here.
To go really early or go really late, and there's nothing really in the middle you can manage.
Well, early you need to clean it up before
set stocking,
or in that early phase of set stocking. You go really late going, it's going to hold all the way through, and I'm not going to get that. The bit in the middle is kind of no man's land where you are going to run into these situations where things get a bit untidy, and that's probably where having cattle, for example, as a policy inside of a deer operation becomes almost critical, right? Because you've got a lot of that.
Putting some young cattle in to maintain a high level.
With forages, you can probably reduce the need for that by having these either very early or very late heading dates, so that you can either clean up.
And there's not a lot else you can do other than maybe, dare I say it, specialist crops like fawning onto red clover, or even if you're fawning onto chicory. The day it's a second year or a third year chicory, it has stems that are probably 5 foot high in a paddock. And so it can get very, very messy very, very quickly as second and third year crops.
The only other thing that the strategy that I have seen that's worked really well is where you've kind of got the fawning hill, but you've got a gate that you can open at the bottom onto an area where you've been able to grow something like a forage brassica,
or Spitfire rape,
or a relish red clover, for example. And so what you're doing is you're opening that gate and just letting those animals track between the two. That works really, really well, but it's only in those situations where you've got the ability,
logistics of
coming of
productive flats
coming off the hill.
And you've got gates coming straight off your fawning blocks.
Yeah.
It's when you start, I assume, mobbing up, because I assume you start to mob up at a certain point of time, and that.
For me, it's generally round about Christmas. Yeah. We leave them alone, let them do their thing. So
make sure all the fawns are standing and moving.
Yeah, and try not to leave anything behind, because they don't have a lot of them, so you got to look after them.
Yeah, that's right. And by then we've actually done the circuit, because then what comes in next is looking after the weaners. So I think the key really is we'll finish with the male system, because that's obviously a big part of Stu's business. But the weaners in your business are mostly replacements, both hinds and future velveting animals.
That's correct. They're no different to a finishing unit.
Yes.
I mean, the dairy industry has taught us to grow a young stock out well. And with the deer thing, you have such a small window from weaning through to the autumn or start of winter, and in the spring to reach your targets, because the females, if they don't reach basically 90% of their mature weight before they're mated, they won't get in calf. They just won't cycle.
And it's actually, unless I'm greatly mistaken, it's almost, you can predict, like when you're finishing for meat and venison, and you almost can program it from the date of your weaning weights to what you can put on, because of the nature of this 90 days of winter or 85 days of winter. You can almost program your live weight to the day when they're ready to go on a truck or meet some key target. So unless I'm mistaken, again, coming back to weaning weights will be heavily defined by fawning date. So your date of individual animals and when they're fawned will have one big influence, and obviously the genetic merit of the hind, the mum, and their ability to grow a fawn or a calf is quite a big part of the recipe of what you end up with at weaning. So you wean quite early. So from that point, what sort of treatment, what do you target your weaners onto? Because there's going to be a small check. They're going to be a bit sulky about being off mum and not having access to a bit of milk. What do you do through those times?
So traditionally we grew a lot of lucerne with prairie grass in it, and we'd wean onto that. And I found that quite effective. We used to do a bit of straight lucerne, but we just found that there is always a check with the transition and everything else, but they're going through a massive check anyway. Going forward, we're sort of leaning more towards your fescues, and because it supports such great red and white clover growth. And we're finding them, it's taken me a couple of years to start fall in love with them, because they're slow to establish and there's a few other issues, but I'm sort of over that phase now and really.
And for your scenario, it's having your sort of like your Haven fescue full of relish red clover as an example.
Yes.
And what you're looking at there is the strength of the fescue for maintaining legume content over time, red clover particularly over time. Obviously breeding reds to try to tolerate grazing in pasture over time has been a big aim of our breeding program, and that's something that we can see that if they're in third, fourth, fifth year of your pasture and you're still seeing your red clover playing a big role between January and April, it sits right over that window of time you're discussing. So it's not just the grass, is it? It's actually it's the package. It's the package of the legume that is holding
well for me.
Yeah. But what I also see, and this is, I guess we're just going to move on a little bit here. Great for that autumn off mum clovers. High protein. I've still got young animals. You've just you don't have milk, which is the ultimate protein source. You need another one. Clovers are really good there. But the one thing I see that fits really well here is we've talked about at the other end of winter, you've got this daylight driven appetite. Wouldn't it be really good to have a daylight-driven
plant system,
which is exactly what a fescue is?
It is exactly what a fescue is, especially the earlier flowering types.
Yeah, so
the later types are relatively dormant and would stretch that out quite a bit. But how do you winter your weaners?
So once we sort of hit that shutdown period, after that, it's just a matter of them surviving the winter, because you can't grow a lot.
Yeah, you've got this parameter. It's like 150 grams, 130 grams for a red. It's about 130 grams a day.
Yeah, if you're lucky.
Well, so
90 is probably more realistic.
Yeah, so 90 to 120
But the really interesting thing is,
you can't really mess with it.
If you let them go and just don't think about them, they'll do 50. If you pile a feed on top of them, right, and give them as much again, they'll probably do 75.
Yeah.
Right? And so why bother?
Yeah.
I think the key thing is you're right. It's really around
cost effectiveness.
Making sure they're healthy.
Yeah.
And you leave them to it.
So with this in mind though, do you, in your business, do you run them around on grass or do you put them on a crop?
No, typically they'll go onto Swedes as well.
Oh, so you put your young animals onto Swedes?
And quite interesting, they prefer the Swedes over kale.
Yes. That is interesting because, again, a very carbohydrate-driven thing. But then again, I think some of the history that we mentioned about the starting of the deer industry in New Zealand are bulb crops, which are pretty much just carbohydrate sources, were used to trap deer and attract them out of the wild. So, deer would jump fences and come into gates.
It's becoming a big problem now.
Yeah.
The wild ones are coming back.
And that is the absolute truth. They are a major pest. Obviously, the hunting fraternity of New Zealand really value them. But the reality is they are very tough on establishing winter feed crops and maintaining winter feed crops because they do love the bulb crops particularly. And so, so your weaners often get access to those.
Yeah, so in my situation, sort of winter's just a shutdown. It's just a survival mode. The next critical period for me is the spring.
So it is this August phase.
So I've suddenly got a lot of animals that it's a money-making period and I've got to try and figure out how to feed them. So this is where some of the newer grasses and that really come into their own because I need a lot of feed from that 10th of August onwards, whether it's going into stags to produce velvet or whether it's trying to grow my weaners out.
So this is where we circle back to a couple of things you've already mentioned. The fescue, which has been a bit of a journey for you. So your big things you've appreciated to date is the legume content. So that's the fair call. Have you seen the earlier spring nature of it?
It's actually my fescue. To be honest, it's had a really hard life. For the first 2 years, we pretty much had a drought, and so it got an awful autumn.
Got a hiding in the autumn.
Absolute hiding in the autumn. And if it had failed, I would have said, well, fair enough. Anything else would have failed too. Yeah. But it actually's come through really well.
Yeah.
So we probably didn't see what I expected to see in the spring, but I can understand why it didn't achieve it.
Yeah. So you've sort of this year, you're relatively speaking, you will be locked and loaded.
I'm excited to see what happens in the spring.
So how many days you brought it forward because of your autumn phase.
We'll be able to look after it a lot better in the autumn and not nail it.
Because that one of the other little bits of work that we've done around the autumn management of fescue was we had a situation where we had some breaks that we'd been grazing and we'd left different amounts of forage in that autumn period. And there was a high correlation between how hard we grazed those in the autumn and what they did in the spring.
Oh, how early they moved.
How early they moved and how much production. So if you under drought, what you've probably done is said, I've got to have it now, and you've given up that real bang.
It cost me my spring growth.
Spring growth. Whereas, we're not in such drought conditions. I think it's a great plant for matching because it also is being driven by day length.
Stu's got an interesting story though about his other forage type that I assume you use you gear up your business because of the importance of that August-September phase. You've utilised Italian ryegrass quite a bit in your business. One, to clean weeds.
Yeah.
And two, because it's just such a strong August grass.
So that August period for me is just critical. That's when once we get to after August, the grasses come and we're away. Yeah. But that early August period is basically where it costs me money if I don't get it right. And I looked at dairy farms and you could see them bringing cows home in August and had grass. So we're trying to reproduce what they're doing. So what we've done is we're probably going to start our winter feeds almost a month earlier than normal in order to try and protect those grasses to help them out in the spring. Yeah. We've also gone putting the Italians into the winter feed paddocks after they're finished.
And then taking them through.
I'm hoping to get sort of 2 springs after that out of them. Yeah.
So and using the whole biennial nature of these plants to pull up that second and third.
And so one of the major lessons I got taught or learnt was our first sort of and real go at the Italians in the situation is we bought some cheap Italian And then I got talked into trying some Menta, is it?
Yes, one of our new products.
So anyway, I gave in and bought a few bags of that. And, next year we'll be buying all Menta. The difference we couldn't control the heading date in the cheap Italian, and we actually tried 2 cheap Italians because I was determined to win. But I'm regretting it majorly now.
Look, Menta's a great grass. The key to those biennials is that they're often quite free seeding, and the point is that there's not a lot of diversity in that. So this is the point of your two types you might have got access to. And so what happens is once they sit in that reproductive phase, they will continue in it for possibly between 2 and 3 months. So once they start seeding, they typically don't stop seeding until well into autumn. Now, genetically, Menta throws seed head like an Italian. The longer you leave it, the more it will still build up, but it's at a much lower frequency. And most importantly, it's very capable of being kept leafy. If the grazing and pressure is high, you can keep it leafy the whole time. And it's a very leafy Italian, basically.
Yeah, we've certainly seen that. We've got a paddock that's got both of them in it. Yeah. And it really stands out. It's so much easier to manage because once we took that seed head off it, it's just stayed green the whole time.
And that's a big deal for your system because the key is you put it in for August and September, but of course there's nothing that's put in for just those windows of time. You are looking to utilise it at all those other points of time in your calendar year as well.
Alistair, if you and this is a bit of a question around, this is a critical time and we're trying to provide a good protein source. In that early part of the spring, so it's still relatively cool, what are the things we can do to try and improve our legume content? What are the things we could do in terms of that?
I think you got to start to divorce a few comments here, is that you've got to actually acknowledge that August grass is as higher quality as legume. Full stop.
Yep.
So you've asked me after how do I get more legume in August, I would say you don't need it.
Right.
Because grass is almost unlimited in its nutritional profile. But what you could have asked me is how do I maintain my protein in a dairy farm, which may not use a lot of nitrogen across the landscape. And like a dairy farm, what you do in autumn will present to how something performs and what nutritional state it will be in the end of winter. And so, for example, environmentally, it's not completely ideal, but like April nitrogen on dedicated early August feeding environments, April nitrogen will have a nutritional effect on how that's presented and actually how it will continue to grow when day length and temperature rises. So before I'd think about how do I get more legume in August when air temperatures are like 12 degrees and legumes need 20 to be successful, I would say no, it's how do you manage crude protein and ME and actual growth at that time. And you do it by species choice, you do it by flowering date choice, and technically you would do it by being thoughtful about what areas are absolutely locked and loaded for August grazing that you need this, and you would consider nitrogen use at the middle of autumn and try to manage quality through winter to that.
And maybe some early spring nitrogen?
But I think very soon you get back into the conversation about where are your legumes. And so it's one thing to boost total productivity through September and October, but to be quite frank, that total productivity in September, October, unlike dairy cows that are peaking in lactation, you actually just need the feed to be in front of you. It would be really attractive if, for example, red clover started really coming through your pasture at the end of September, because you're only a month away from pasture quality decline, and having legumes starting to be really present for pasture quality decline is a super important part. And that was where moving on to the male phase would be quite important. So
great answer, because actually what you're saying is how do we encourage protein? Right?
Well, you're assuming protein's the whole driver though. Yeah, but energy will be a big deal and total volume will be a big deal.
But I think that your comment around clover is a really important one. Yeah. Right, so I was kind of tricking you into
saying that,
to telling me.
Well done, because
telling me a little bit about
you triggered me there.
The nitrogen. So that's
the real point being is legumes are absolutely essential to our production system because one, they pump nitrogen into our system, but mainly when times are warm.
Yes, and that's the critical point.
And most importantly, our grasses are not limited in their quality unless we leave them too long.
Mm-hmm.
They have dead material, they have seed head, or they've got disease. All of those things can be are based on management and possibly nutrient cycling. So we can control many of them by our choices and our management.
So coming back to that, and that's why...
And by the way, when they decline is when legumes are vitally important nutritionally.
And therefore, some of these grasses, in terms of bringing them from the autumn, right?
Correct.
And this is the bit that I often see is where we've done that too early.
Yeah.
And so we're
shutting them up too early,
yeah.
And you forget that you're not really worrying about grazing them till August, which means they could be sitting there for 90 days. And we're hoping that it's in an okay quality to get a growing animal up to 450 grams a day if they can eat more.
There is a problem with dragging feed that long.
Yeah, correct.
Into
so, for
spring.
example, with the Italian, something like Manta, I'd be definitely grazing it right up to the day you're putting them on crop. I'd be literally leveling the paddock and having absolute faith that an Italian ryegrass of the quality that Manta is will grow all winter in a very fresh state because you've taken it from a low point and it'll just tick on through, get a couple of snows on it, get a fair few frosts, and we'll be ticking away under that. But if you carried it, it's quite a risk profile for collapsing in the snow, not being in a great state.
Yeah, that's certainly past experiences. I don't worry too much about the Italians, how hard we are on them in the autumn.
Yep,
because I know they'll
grow, they'll tick over.
They'll tick over and they'll just kick into gear so much quicker in the spring.
Yeah, one is to carry the feed in a good state when the weaners and the stags go onto it in August. The other is to know that it's just going to absolutely fire right at that moment as well. So actually, I think that's still a good segue into the last and probably most interesting farm system for your business, which is just the system based on boys. It's literally, 900 just testosterone-filled males that just love fighting.
Yeah, for those who don't know, sort of the stags, they roar when they're randy. Yeah. And at the moment, it's just the noise at home is just chaos.
900 of them.
Yeah.
And they're all socially very interesting at this moment too, aren't they?
You tend to park them down near the neighbours. You keep them away from your house because they're extremely rowdy all night.
Yeah, correct. They get quite spatial at this time too, though, don't they?
They're amazing animals. So I grew up where we ran sort of 900 stags on another farm, and they had it was poorer quality land, so they had the space to spread out. They seem to be able to adapt. So I'm running quite big mobs on small areas. They just learn that 5 square metres is their turf rather than 100 square metres. Yeah. It's bedlam out there, but it seems to work.
Yeah. And so this is very important to even build what the system is, because I think everyone can relate to a maternal system where you're having young and the young are your final product. But what we're talking about here is a male-based system where you're building up a population of stags, which are the male deer, and the harvesting is off the velvet, which is the soft component of the velvet antler. Yeah. And so this is the product that we're seeking. And so I suppose when we're starting to discuss feed systems for these guys, what are the key moments of time, or what are the key things to getting outside genetics, of course, and potential? But what are the key feeding windows for these guys to get these big velvet harvests?
There's probably very few times when feed's not king.
Okay.
Through the raw, they'll actually stop eating. So they just naturally, it's that day length thing.
So that's middle of autumn, pretty much.
Yeah, that's right now. Sort of that starts about the end of February and will run through for about 2.5 months. Yep. At that point, they're really looking for scope more than feed.
So do you need body condition coming into that phase? Is that an important thing to get them up to spec, or?
I believe so. It's sort of funny. They'll probably lose up to 35% of to 40% of their condition.
Wow.
Through the raw. They just stop eating and they fight and they're very frustrated.
Yeah.
And so the critical part to me is get them through that raw and then try and get some weight back into them.
Okay.
So that's very late autumn.
Yeah.
And so that can
So what sort of feedstuffs are you looking at that moment? Because I assume that is literally a tiny window between day length fully kicking in and their appetite leaving as well. So you probably got, what, a 4-week window or a 3-week window?
It really is.
Yeah.
It's generally it's autumn saved pasture as a rule.
Yep.
And as I say, we're changing the system a wee bit to try and get them onto winter feeds quicker.
Yeah.
And so
the quality of those winter feeds.
You got to understand that they've pretty much given up eating for quite a while, so their stomachs are extremely small and they can't actually consume a lot. It takes them a while to re-stretch their stomachs back out again.
Which it actually means that for every mouthful you need the energy and the protein. And that's where your crops kick in because their fractional degradation rate, they're not something that just binds them up with fibre.
No.
You're actually giving them the chance to eat and eat more.
And I think that the critical that period, that autumn period, really sets us up for the next spring because that pretty much dictates when we have our button drop. And for those that aren't aware, in the wild, an animal grows a big set of antlers every year. They actually fall off naturally. And so when we talk button, that is actually what's left of what would have been a big set of antlers.
Yep.
And they shed them.
So you literally are harvesting the velvet and the button is the tiny bit that's left.
We
that
leave
actually,
a wee piece on.
That comes back and has created the antler.
Yes.
It's the leftover of the antler. So it just goes through the natural process of natural shedding.
And so we just find them. They'll just fall off randomly all across the paddocks and everything else, and we find them. So.
And so the timing of that is around body conditions, so that those casting dates can be earlier if you've got a stag in good condition.
Does that imply they're growing at that stage? Does that imply that the velvet is already on the move of the next generation?
There'd be something to research. I wouldn't know, but I just know. If they come out of that raw in the autumn in really good order, where button drop date will be earlier.
Yeah. And does that change anything to do with your business though?
Just means I've got to be back from holiday a bit quicker.
Yeah. So it does mean the season's tracking a little bit earlier.
Does.
What I'm saying is, does that mean the whole season will track a little bit earlier?
It's a funny one. I'm not too sure whether we win or lose on it. So if they're losing buttons in August, that means we're trying to grow velvet when the weather's cool and feeds not, we haven't quite got the condition on them. So I think you pay a bit of penalty in that initial harvest because because basically from when they lose the button to when we cut them is about 55 days. Yeah. So it grows incredibly fast. So
there's actually a trick here still is to just get your condition right enough. But it's actually a window that's attractive because you want to get your primary velveting window over your highest volume of high quality growth, pasture growth, which is pretty much October, isn't it?
Yeah, the get out of jail card is if we have an early button drop and velvet early, then we tend to get more regrowth.
Secondary cut.
Yes. And so so my aim is to get early button drop and fat stags grow good velvet, and then we'll have regrowth to cut, and the regrowth is quite on mature stags, you've been cutting 2 and 3 kilos quite often, which is
quite a large amount. It's almost the same as a yearling stag's first cut, isn't it?
Yes, it's certainly worth having. It's
and this is really I reckon is a really key point here is the feeding of these stags is really critical in terms of the end product. So we know that for a lot of these things, the level of feeding, the quality of feed is really important. But in this particular case, because you're going through periods of inappetence where they will not eat, and particularly through the winter, but also over that rut period, the windows you've got to really charge those animals out are so small, right, that actually it does require a really good focus in on making sure that those, you can't catch up because once you're through that window, you're into another period of inappetence. So it's really, you either do it well, there's no second chance here. And so that's, I think, the key, the guys who have got feeding stags right understand that you've only got one chance.
Yeah. And it sets up your whole spring.
And that sets up the whole
So would you
lot.
describe the start of all, the August feeding or the September, when I'm talking that is the last month of winter or the first 2 months of spring as the drivers?
For me, that early August period, I mean,
Even for the stags.
This year, we'll basically, my winter feed program is, we hope to have everything pretty much off winter feed by the 15th of August, which is very early for us.
Last month of winter.
Because I want them onto grass
as fast as possible.
As early as I can. So
and remember, so you're going from a carbohydrate source to essentially a protein source. Now, taking your point that you want that grass to be high quality and high in protein, crude protein, but that's the critical bit because they also respond. Those stags, as they're growing that new antler, also respond to protein.
Yeah,
right. So that's
protein's the big driver.
Protein's big
and
driver.
Spring, until you go to seed, protein's not often limited, but I assume the volume part is a big deal. It's more about just placing a whole lot of high quality grass in front of these animals is the real key. So again, when you've got the fight for who gets August and September grass in your business, you're wanting your replacement stock to be growing well. The stags and the velveting program is a major part of your financial outcome. Who gets the priority and who gets what? like who gets the young grass? Who gets the Italian?
Who gets to eat the last of the winter feed?
Yeah,
probably the weaners.
Yeah, so the weaners you'll try to keep on to that winter feed just a little bit longer.
If there's a tail on the winter feed, it'll probably be the
weaners that do that job. And then
reluctantly, I cringe at saying that.
But
we don't. They'll certainly be more or less air blub. They might be on it, but they're not. We're not. Because to me,
it's still amazing.
Electric fencing, you got to be really careful because it can be a form of controlled starvation.
Yes.
And
I wonder whether understanding that system, whether that's where your supplement that goes with your winter feed might elevate in terms of it might be that's the bit where there is a bit of lucerne baleage or there's some red clover baleage going.
You can help the situation. The other thing is they don't all lose their buttons at once. So old stags will lose them probably a month, 6 weeks before the young stag. So as much as I say that 1st of August or 15th of August is a critical date for younger stags that are still growing, they're probably running a month behind the older ones. So there is still a window where they can be on winter feed for quite a while before there's sort of paying the penalty.
I think be a really good time now just to discuss a few feed options for this time frame because I want to draw back and just mention it in passing regarding your use of Italian ryegrass and how you use it, because what I understand in your program, you've got some genuine weed pressures in your rainfall zone and your soil types. And the one thing that is attractive about using an Italian ryegrass is that you can actually manage it with a lot of weed control options. And obviously deer can manage certain weeds to a high degree, but some of the thistles and some of the woody weeds that just get past, they become quite tricky. So the beauty of straight Italian is that you have a lot of chemical options to tidy up and clean up a paddock. Now, I understand your program is that you tend to take that Italian through initially and then bring in red clover, bring in white clover over the top of it. And that often will take about 6 months for that to kick in. And typically that's an investment in bringing quite decent legume content into the next spring and summer of the Italian. After taking it through a second winter, you come into a much richer spring and summer phase the following year. Another system, if cleaning isn't as big a focus, and when I say cleaning, I mean using a straight grass to be able to clean weeds out more aggressively. The tetraploid hybrid ryegrasses are fitting in this space, and grasses like Mohaka, a new one coming actually, which is going to be amazing in this program when we get the right endophyte for this farm style, which is very important to put endophytes that don't have a ryegrass staggers risk inside a deer fence, because deer are very sensitive. So we're looking at non-staggering endophytes, particularly around that AR1 style, or without endophyte in some cases, and a variety called Anvil, which is again very, very late flowering, but very strong winter and spring growth. Those types of grasses loaded with red clover from the day of sowing are really attractive in the system because they're providing an element of longevity, which is attractive from an investment perspective. Every year extra you get is a real benefit in the system, especially if the red clovers can last 3 to 4, even 5 years. It's quite attractive if the grasses last as long as the red clover. So those tetraploid hybrids are really built for these systems because they've got the bob each way on being winter types. Yep. They're absolutely spring types, and they have the summer activity a little bit more relatable to a high quality perennial finishing system. I think that's where Manta's suited your system really well, is that if it's grazed relatively intensely and maybe just, let's say, managed at some point of early summer, there is no question that it can be a very leafy Italian through the rest of that summer and autumn, which you're experiencing. But once that's loaded with red clover too, that becomes quite magical. The herbs in the deer world they've always been in the deer industry, from creating diversity for such a interesting stock class, bringing copper into your program. So chicories and choice chicory, our ecotane, they are plants that can bring copper, in the case of ecotane, selenium, and to a degree cobalt, into those deer systems, which are quite essential. The thing about the chicory, I suppose, depending on your landscape, is choice is quite perennial in its style, and that it lasts genuinely more than 1 or 2 years, depending on soil type. And the one weakness is in deer system, although chicory is exceptional, it has this big seeding event that happens all the way through spring into early summer. So stem control, CD control, and chicory in a deer system has never been the easiest thing to do unless it's a specific finishing. But as soon as you put chicory in with the breeding operation, it gets very, very messy. Plantain, I feel, probably is more stable. It can deliver at a more consistent level, but more like grass inside those systems. So they're the two other species that can benefit pretty much early to mid-spring. I think their nutritional profile for velveting operations is super interesting. As you know, Juddy, our ecotane has really high calcium content, really high when stags are absolutely pumping blood into their velvet, the venison, they're absorbing a hell of a lot of calcium out of their bodies, unless I'm mistaken. And so, red clover, ecotane, chicory all play a good role in that moment for these guys. But it's really hard to get past hybrid ryegrass and red clover in this one. Mohaka and relish, built for the system.
Yeah, we broadcast, as I say, that Italian, and then we broadcast the clovers and plantain into it later on. And certainly the plantain loves being broadcast.
Absolutely, yeah. And especially into a system like that, which is a little bit more open by the time you get through the seeding phase.
And we've taken any weeds out, so that sort of opens it up for beer.
Which is pretty cool.
Well, I think probably time to a bit of a wrap and summarise where we've come, because we've covered a lot, and I think it's been a really interesting session in terms of drawing out not only what's happening in a farm systems point of view, but the forages that really play to that. So I think we've done it.
And deer systems are just fascinating. You may have nothing to do with deer in your day job, but, what we've just discussed is actually quite a fascinating animal production system. It's just not the traditional cattle system or the traditional sheep system. It's actually got these big drivers of day length and the behaviour of your animals, which always makes it a very interesting one to build forage systems around.
And the fact that we're going through these periods of inaptitude and that, it's very hard to catch up in some of these systems. I think we described a deer system pretty well, and I think, Alice, you've done a really good job in terms of weaving in where those forages or the different forages play in a deer system, and expertly navigated by Stu in terms of his on the ground knowledge around that, and probably the couple of key really things for me was around those hybrid ryegrasses loaded with clover, the idea of these forages either really early spring, where we can clean those up, or heading dates much later, where we can set stock these animals and not run into the problem of a real poor quality seeding event in the middle. And then the other thing I think we've touched on really is around the importance of the winter feed, but it's almost the importance of it not being that important, that they are browsers and they will go through there, but having a base that you can really launch off when the daylight flicks. So I think it's been a fascinating session, but I think you can see here probably more than any other system where forages, specific forages, can make a huge difference to the overall just by playing onto those areas that are really important.
And in my part, I would take away is that relatively speaking, the animal is quite simplistic and predictable because of all these things. But only small changes can have quite good consequences or snowballing consequences throughout the calendar year. And moving things forward 5 days doesn't sound a lot in a program, but actually means 3Ks on your weaning weights, or your hind taking a stag earlier if the stag is present, and getting feed on hand when the day length changes in August, that their appetite can go from growing them at 90 grams a day to 450 grams a day just within 4 days. And if you don't have the feed there, you don't get that. You don't benefit from that. And then knowing that you got some money times that are really essential, one, that moment in August, but also, not dropping the ball at the start and the middle of spring, so you can actually get those velveting animals right in the sweet spot for doing releasing all their genetics, basically. That'd be the things that, they're small windows of time.
Yeah.
And they can have a big impact.
I'll tell you what, it's been very nostalgic, actually. Thinking about the way we started this journey in terms of deer, and probably I need to get back to the photo albums and start having a look at some of those old photos. We might see some hair on you, Alistair,
yeah,
which is
and yours might not be grey. So that's pretty much sums it up nicely.
Thanks for coming in, Stu. I think you've held us to being reasonably real, and we'll see you on another podcast.